want to stream my thing here. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go to the screens, and I want screen 2, and then go live. Okay, so now I'm streaming, and I'm recording, and here we go. Normally, in the normal course of events, this is the part where I say, your screen should look like this. Your screen should not look like this. You should not have a little knight and a navy diver on your screen. The reason I have them here is to talk about the separation between a game model and an animation, because we have to start talking about animation, and it has a lot of concepts. So, real quickly, last time we built an animator controller, we populated it with an idle animation, and that was as far as we got, and he was just standing in his idle animation all the time. So if I press, so what I've done to demonstrate the concept of how animations work is I went and got these models. One of them is from a guy that I've worked with a lot, the Navy Diver. Is made by a content creator online, and he and I have worked together on some things, and he makes really high quality stuff when you're doing like first person shooters and you want stuff to look realistic. And then I have this RPG Hero that's just a free model I found on the Unity Asset Store. I don't know anything about this guy. And what I wanted to demonstrate to you is that if I press play, all three models will be doing the same animation, and they're exactly in sync. And I'm actually going to... my character will move around based on my cursor because he's got the scripts applied to him. But if I don't move him and he's facing the same direction, you can see they're all completely in sync. Even though these were created by 3 separate creators, the animation is exactly the same in all 3 cases. The reason the animation is the same is because they are all using the same animator controller, which is what we created last time. To make that clearer, I want to show you here. I'm going to grab a new thing that I downloaded and had ready to go for sure. What do I do with it? Oh, there it is. I'm going to grab this animation, and I'm going to grab animation dance back up 2, and I'm going to grab this animation clip and just drag it into the animator controller. Now, right now, there's no way for the animator controller to get to this animation because there are no arrows going to it or from it. So this animation exists by itself. But I'm going to make it the default animation because I want you to see clearly that the characters are animated independent of their model. So I'm going to set this layer as the default state. Now when I press play, you'll see them all doing a haka. And again, these 3 models were not created by the same people, and the animation was created by a 4th person. But they're all in sync because the animation is independent of the model. You can create animations that are specific to models, and we're going to do some of that later on. But you don't need to, and animations applied to a humanoid rig will work for any model that has that rig. Okay? So that's just demonstrating that that's how animation works as a concept. If the animation clip is applied to the skeleton, and the skeleton is a part of the humanoid model, and once you have that skeleton, the animation can come from any place. If you want to get your own animations rather than make your own, you can go to a place called Mixamo.com, which is owned now by... it doesn't matter. It's owned by one of the companies out there that makes 3D software. And you can upload any model that you have onto their website and then download basically an unlimited number of animations. And they've got a really good, deep library. We're not going to use that because the animations that came with my soldier pack work really well for what we're trying to do. So we're going to use those instead. But I just want to demonstrate that an animation is not the same as the model. The animation is separate. In this case, we happen to be using animations that came with the model, but they would work for my knight or for my diver as well. So I'm going to get rid of these guys from my scene because I don't actually need them in my zombie game. And I'm going to go to the animator, and I'm going to get rid of the dance because I don't really need that either. It doesn't really fit. And notice that when I get rid of it, the entry node, which is the exactly what it sounds like, it's the way into this animation layer, automatically pops back to pointing at the idle animation. The reason it does that is because it has to have some default animation. So if I press play again, go back to my scene, you'll see my character goes back into his aiming mode, which is fine. Okay. But and that works fine as long as we're not moving. As soon as we start moving, it looks weird because he's just sliding around, right? So that's not ideal. So we're going to fix that by adding in some more animations. So I can get rid of, I don't need to get rid of it. It doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to go to my animator. And I'm going to add a new animation that is going to come from Toon Soldiers. And if I go to Toon Soldiers Armies, animation, handgun.
Mr. Work, I don't have the animator in my top left. That's under window.
Yeah, so if you go to the folder My Animator Controllers, or if you click on your player, you can double click on this animator controller in your hierarchy, and that'll open the animator window. Or you can go to Window, Animation, Animator, and that'll open it.
I was literally just about to ask about that. Thank you for clearing that up. Because I was like, I don't see anything. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, you should have the animator open because we're about to do a bunch of stuff with it. So does everyone? So make sure the player is selected, and that you have, and that you also have AC player 01 selected, and that should be what's showing on the screen. So does everyone have that now?
I do. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to add an animation to allow our player to run. And the reason this is going to take a couple of sessions is because there's a lot to animation, but having good animation is what makes a game look good. So we're going to grab, so we're going to go Toon Soldiers Armies, Animation, Handgun, and you'll see there's got 3 folders in here along with our shooting animations. The 3 folders are aim poses, movement, and root motion. Don't worry about aim poses right now because we're going to be always aiming directly straight ahead of us. We're never going to aim off to up above us or down below us because right now the game doesn't have any vertical movement. It's all flat. Movement is the movement animation, and I'll just click on one here so you can see what it looks like. If I drill down here to Handgun Combat Run and drag this up, I can press play, and you'll see my model is moving. If I want to see what it looks like on the actual character I have in the game, I can just drag the player, drag the soldier into my preview screen, and it'll switch to him. So that's what my run animation is going to look like in the game. Now, let me show you the difference between this and root motion. We are not using root motion. Root motion is the animation has baked into it actual movement in physics in 3D space. So let me show you what that looks like so you'll see what the difference is. So I'm going to go to Handgun Combat Run, and if I press play here, it's just not showing it at all because it's in the preview. Basically, the animation has built into it the actual movement of if your legs were this far apart and you moved with this much force, this is how far the character would move. We're not using that because we want to control how fast the character moves through scripts rather than relying on the animation because we don't have a lot of convenient means for updating the animation if our character is moving too fast or too slow. So all that to say is we're not using the Handgun Combat Run in root motion. We're using the one in the movement folder, but they're named the same except for the handgun. The one in root motion has the letters RM in the title. Anyway, so let's grab Handgun Combat Run and drag it into our scene, into our animator. Notice that it's grayed out. The reason it's grayed out is because there's no way for it's because it's not the default. So normally all of your states will be gray. It's not grayed out. It just has a gray background. But right now there's no way for the animator to get to this state because we don't have a transition between idle and running. For right now, let's just set this to the default state, just like we did with the dance earlier. And the Handgun Combat Run is now going to be our default. So I'm going to go back to my scene, or I click my animator. I'm going to press play, and now when I move around, the player looks like he's moving correctly, sort of. If I stand still, though, he's still running because there's no transition between the two states. So this kind of setup is called a state machine. We talked about that a little bit last time. And it just means I'm either in one state or in another state, or I'm transitioning between states, which is fine. We just need to give the player the ability to transition between states. So I'm going to go back to Combat Idle, right-click on it, and set layer as default state. And then I want to transition from idle to running. And I want to do that based on a parameter, which I don't have any parameters right now. So in the upper left-hand corner of your animator, you'll see a thing that says layers and a thing that says parameters. We're going to add a parameter here. Let me look at my notes. Let's just call it, okay, we're going to create a float parameter, and we're just going to call it speed. It's a terrible name, but we're gonna as we move through this, we're actually going to get rid of this, so this is just temporary anyway. So we're going to have a float called speed, and we're going to make a transition from here, in the animator, right-click on Handgun Combat Idle, click Make Transition, and you'll get a little arrow coming out. And you want to left-click on Handgun Combat Run. This is saying, I want to transition from idle to run. If you click on the white arrow, you'll get the transition window in the inspector. So if you have one of the animations just clicked, you won't have the transition window in the inspector. You'll have information about that animation clip. But we want to click instead on the actual arrow so that you've got all this nonsense. Okay. This is the animation transition window, and we're not going to do a tremendous amount with it, but I want to demonstrate how it works before we go into our more advanced setup. The one way to transition from one animation to another is to use an exit time. And that just says, after this animation is finished playing, then go into the next animation. I'm not going to change anything here. I'm just going to leave all this as it is, so what's going to happen when I press play is the Handgun Combat Idle animation is going to play exactly one time, and then it will switch to the Handgun Combat Run animation, because I said, yes, it has an exit time, and after 0.875 seconds, I want you to switch and transition. I can also press play, and you'll see the animation play, and then transition into running. I can also go to a specific point in time by dragging the blue down arrow to a specific window. And once I get to the transition, where the two animations overlap in my scene here, in my inspector view, where they overlap, you can actually see him transitioning from idle to running. Okay? So again, we're going to just, we're not going to update this right now. We're going to have it transition automatically after it plays the idle animation one time. So I'm going to make sure I have my player selected, soldier base selected rather, and I'm going to press play, and I can watch it in the animator. So see, it played the idle animation, and then it went to the run animation. Let me do that one more time. So I'm going to select my player, the one who has an animator associated with him. Because remember that my simple player up at the top doesn't have an animator. It's just a capsule that is holding all of our scripts and everything. The actual model is the soldier base 01. So I select him. If I don't have him selected, then I can't watch what the animator is doing, because it's not looking at the specific instance of the animator associated with the player. It's looking at the root object, the root animator that's in our project folder. So press play, and this blue bar indicates that it plays the idle animation one time, and now it's just playing the combat run animation over and over, which would be fine if that's what I wanted, but it's definitely not what I want. What I want instead is I want the animation to play when my character is moving. So I'm going to go back to my transition window. I'm going to uncheck exit time, because we don't want it to transition based on a certain amount of time. I can leave the fixed duration, so it'll transition over the course of a quarter of a second. And I'll leave order interruption checked for now. It doesn't matter what that does. But notice that we have a warning down here now. And this warning says the transition needs at least one condition or an exit time to be valid. Otherwise, it will be ignored. In other words, if you don't tell the animator when this thing should transition, either using an exit time or some other condition, it doesn't know when to go down this arrow. And right now it does not know because I unchecked exit time. So I'm going to click under conditions, I'm going to click the plus symbol, and you'll see that it defaults to speed and nothing else because the only parameter I have available to use is speed, so it defaults to that. And I can make it greater than or less than, and I'm going to make it, if speed's greater than 0.1, then I want it to go from idle to run. So let's press play and see what happens. Well, I don't have my warning, but I'm also not transitioning to run. The reason I'm not transitioning to run is because this speed value is still set to 0. If I set it to 8, I start running. If I set it, I'm manually setting this back to 0, it's still running because there is no transition back. So let's stop the game and let's right click on Handgun Combat Run, click on Make Transition, and drag the arrow back to idle. And, sorry, my phone's just going crazy because we're getting a delivery, I think. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. Okay. So we make a transition back from run back to idle. So if we click on that animation, again, we don't want it to have an exit time because then it'll just play the run animation one time and then it will go back to being idle, which is not what we want. We want the run to keep playing as long as we're moving at any kind of speed. So I'm going to unclick exit time. I'm not going to change any of the other settings. And I'm going to change the conditions list to add, it will default to speed is greater than, but I actually want speed to be less than 0.1. Because we're not using an analog controller, I don't have to deal with the case of where it's exactly at 0.1. Right now we're just using the keyboard, and my input is always either 1, the whole number 1, or the whole number -1. It is not ever any fragment of that. So it's either 0 or 1. So by setting the speed here to be, I don't have to deal with the case where it's exactly equal to 0.1, which I would have to deal with normally and will deal with later, but I'm not going to go to that effort now because this is all temporary. The reason I say it's all temporary is we're going to do something more better in just a minute. Okay, so let me press play here. And again, if I'm moving around, the animator doesn't know that my character is moving at all right now. It has no way of knowing that because this parameter is not updating. I can update it manually to set it back to 8. And you'll see that he goes to run. And if I change it back manually to 0, it transitions back to the idle. So that's at least doing what we want. When we're moving, the game is updating the parameter. When the parameter is updated, the animation switches between idle and run and back when I update the value. Okay, so let's go to our script. We need to go now to our script to tell it to set that speed value to what it should be. So let's go to my simple player, and that should change what I have in the inspector. And I have a movement script here. Now we're going to break one of our rules by having the movement also control the animation, but we're going to clean that up in just a few minutes as soon as I get through this example. So I'm going to click on movement, and that's going to open it up in Visual Studio. So I'm going to add a animator, so public animator, my animator. And then on the first frame, when the character is first loaded up, I'm going to set my animator equal to GameObject.getComponent animator. Actually, never mind. I'm not going to do that. Sorry. I try so hard not to do that stuff. We're going to set the animator manually because the animator, remember, is attached to the soldier, not to this game object. We'll deal with that in a better way in just a minute. Okay, so you see down here we have all of our movement. We have our horizontal input, our vertical input, the move direction. We clamp it between 0 and maxing out at 1, and then we multiply it times movement speed. What we also want to do then is we want to set our animator's speed parameter to our whatever the magnitude of our movement speed is. So I'm going to add a line in here that says my animator dot set float, because remember it's a float parameter, and I'm going to say double quotes speed. Important point. This speed has to be spelled and capitalized exactly the way you spelled it in the animator. If it doesn't, it won't find it. It's not smart enough to ignore case and say, oh, you meant this speed with a capital S. So the spelling of the word in the script has to match exactly the parameter name that you have in the animator controller. Okay, so set float speed equal to my move direction dot magnitude. So magnitude is going to be a number between 0 and 1 that is how fast I am moving. But I also multiplied it times my speed, which we had set to 8. So it's actually going to be a number between 0 and 8, which should look fairly familiar. Okay, click save. That's going to save my script. Click back over to Unity. My little thing's going to twirl down here saying it's compiling and checking for any errors. All right, is everybody caught up with me, or am I going too fast?
Can I see the code again?
Sure. So what we added was public animator, my animator, and we added this line, my animator.setFloat.
You might want to tell them that they put semicolons after everything in C#.
Oh, and we put semicolons after every line in C#. Good point. Good tip.
Yeah, I noticed like if you don't, it puts like a red like tilde symbol at the end of it.
That's an error.
Yeah, that's,
yellow is warning and error is red.
Or
yep, that's exactly right. If I don't include my semicolon, then it thinks I'm trying to carry on with my statement on this next line, but it says you've got some characters I don't expect. If you hover over this, it'll say I'm expecting a semicolon. The error handling in Visual Studio is very good, and the error handling in Unity is also very good. So it'll tend to tell you exactly what you're doing incorrect. So, Tony, y'all caught up?
So when you do the My Animator, it auto wires all this stuff?
Yes, but we're going to... Yes, to some degree.
I mean, you've done it with like the character controller and... Well, no, you've got the character controller specifically defined.
Right. So we're gonna actually set it in the editor for this little example, because and the reason I'm not wiring it up correctly in code is because we're about to write code that's going to wire it up correctly for the way we're actually going to do it. This is just an example.
Cool.
Okay. So make sure everybody's caught up here, and then I'm going to go back to Unity. And if you look now in the movement script, you'll see that it's got my movement speed, my character controller, and my animator. But the animator is set to none. Character controller is also set to none, but we wrote code, come back over here, to go grab the character controller that's attached to this game object. The problem is, not the problem, but a challenge is there is no animator component attached to this game object. It's down here attached to this other thing. We're going to deal with that in our animator handler in just a minute. But for now, the simple way to get around that is we can actually just drag the soldier base 01. So on the simple player, left click on the soldier base 01 and just drag it to where it says my animator. What that does is it says, oh, I should use the animator that's attached to this game object you just dragged into my slot. It is smart enough to go, you don't want me to use the soldier model, you want me to use the animator that's attached to that model, which is exactly what we want it to use. Now, I'm going to keep my soldier highlighted here so I can watch what happens in the animator window and make sure I have maximize on play unhighlighted so it's not going to maximize. And I'm going to press play. I'm not going to touch anything for a second. Okay, note that my speed is set to 0.0 and my handgun idle animation is what's playing. Now, as I start to move, you'll see that my speed ramps up. My speed value is now set to 8, which is what it does when I'm moving at full speed. And my run animation is playing. It's running me forward, and that looks fine as long as I'm running forward. And then if I let go of the keys, it will ramp back down to idle. So that's the simplest example of how to transition between two different animation states through code. the reason I keep saying simple and temporary, and that's not really how we're going to do it, is we do have a kind of a glaring problem, and that is when I run sideways or backwards, my animation is incorrect. There are a couple of different ways to handle this. One of them is to put a bunch of different kinds of transitions to say, okay, if I'm running backwards, then play this animation, or if I'm running to the sideways, play this animation. But I'm actually going to do something, we're actually going to do something much nicer than any of that, and we're going to build a blend tree that will take our input, convert it into a 2D graph, and play animations that are blended together nicely based on whatever my input is. But I first wanted to make sure that you understood that what an animation is, how transitions work, and how we can affect it from code. So, to that end, left click on Handgun Combat Run and press delete. And click on your speed and press delete. So you should say list is empty and you should be back to your Handgun Combat idle. Also, let's open up our movement script and let's get rid of the My Animator reference. So I'm deleting that, and I'm also deleting the set float. Also, again, it says My Animator, and it says it's got the red squigglies because I deleted it as one of the variables at the beginning of the script. So it says, I don't know what you're talking about. So the name does not exist, which is fine because I'm going to delete this line. Okay, now from a programming point of view, what we just had was dirty and gross and horrible and should never be done. And that was, we had our movement script, which is supposed to take our input and convert it into movement of the model, also controlling animation, which is not what we want to do. We want to have a script should handle one thing at a time. It's certainly possible to build every script that we have as one big, huge monolithic script. You can put movement, our aim orientation, our custom cursor, all in the same script, and it would work just fine. The problem is, then when you have an issue, you have to figure out where in that code is broken, and you can cause other things within the code to break. By keeping everything separated and keeping my code clean and nice, I don't have to worry about if I have a problem with my cursor all of a sudden, I can go to my custom cursor script to fix it, rather than having to dig through a big, long thing of code. So, we are going to now add a component here, and we're going to call this component, click Add Component, in the inspector, with your simple player selected, in the inspector, click Add Component, and we're going to add a component called, Animator Handler. And we're going to click Create and Add. Oops. I clicked something to make Visual Studio pop up. So you can click on the script, or you can double click it. We also want to take the script, the Animator Handler script, and drag it up to our scripts folder, just to keep our project clean-ish. Okay, so double click my scripts and go to Animator Handler, or you can click on your simple player, click on your Animator Handler, and it will highlight it in your project. Double click it and you'll open up and you'll see it has our default start and update functions laid out for us, but we are going to add some stuff to it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add public float my horizontal movement. Capitalization here matters again. Little m, big H, big M for movement. We're going to add public float my vertical movement. These values are actually going to store the amount that I'm moving horizontally or vertically, and we'll deal with that in just a second. Then we're going to do public aim orientation, my aim orientation. And what this is doing is saying I need to go get a script, a component called aim orientation, so that I can see which way I'm aiming. And then we'll do public animator my animator, just as we did before, but we're going to now define it. And public game object my soldier model. there are a dozen ways you could handle this, grabbing this animator. I'm using a kind of clunky way of doing it because I want to make sure that you understand that what we're getting is the animator, not the model itself. So in the start function, I want to set my aim orientation equal to GameObject.getComponent, angle brackets, aim orientation, open and close parentheses, semicolon. That says go get the component called aim orientation that is attached to this game object. And then my animator.
So should that be the My Soldier model?
Not for the aim orientation. The aim orientation is attached to the... Let me go back here. If I go back to my player, aim orientation is one of our components that's attached to the player. The animator is attached to the soldier model, which is exactly how we're going to do this. So we're
I got it.
My animator is equal to my soldier model dot get component animator. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I see what you're doing now. I forgot that the lowercase game object, what this is tied to.
Yep, the lowercase game object. And in fact, if you don't put that there, it will just assume, I guess you mean this game object that the script is attached to. I'm explicitly putting it here to so that we can remember that game object is this game object, and other game objects will have a different name. In this case, my soldier model. Okay. So we're going to do two things here. We're going to say my animator dot set float. Bear with me. Anim horizontal movement is going to get my aim orientation dot my relative movement dot x, and then we can copy this and change horizontal to vertical and change my relative movement dot x to my relative movement dot y. Now there's a bunch of red in here. This is broken at the moment, and this is why animation is, we have to spend some time talking about animation. We have to change several things all at the same time in order for this to work. So, right now we're creating the animator handler, and it's going to set two floats: animation, anim horizontal movement, and anim vertical movement inside of my animator. I haven't defined those floats yet, and I also have not set what my relative movement is in my aim orientation. So my relative movement doesn't mean anything right now. It's going to in just a minute. So, let's go fix my relative movement by adding that into our aim orientation script. I'm going to click Save, and then I'm going to come back to my scripts. I'm going to go to the My Scripts folder and double-click on aim orientation. You can also come over here to the aim orientation on your simple player, double-click it, either way. And we're going to add two things. We're going to add public vector3 my relative velocity and public vector2 to my relative movement. Okay. Now, wow, I misspelled relative very badly. My relative movement. Okay. Now, before we were talking about the red squiggly underlines, notice that there's a little bit of an underline, dotted underline under my relative velocity and my relative movement. The reason for that is I'm defining these values, but I'm never actually setting them in the script. So it doesn't know what to do with them. So it's saying, hey, you've defined some variables that you're not actually using. Do you really want to keep using them? And we do. So down here at the very end, but above this curly brace, but after all of our other logic for aim orientation, we're going to add a comment here that says second bit determine relative movement. The 2 double slashes mean it's a comment. It's not actually code. It's just so that we can know what this code is doing. Press enter. And I'm going to say my relative velocity is equal to, and just bear with me here, transform, which is the transform component of this game object. And then a command here, function here we're going to call this inverse transform direction, parentheses, my character controller dot velocity dot normalized. Well, what in the good God world is that? This says go get my movement relative to myself. That's the inverse transform direction. So let me show you what I mean. If I press play here, well, I can't press play because I've got errors. So I'll come back in here and just try and talk it out. If I'm moving to the left, if my character is moving to the left, I want its animation to reflect that he's moving to his left. What I don't want is for him to play his run forward animation at that point. So I need to know if I'm moving to my left or to my right. But because we're doing a top-down shooter, his orientation changes in world space all the time. I need to know if he's moving to the left relative to where he was in the last frame. So that's what this big, long, complicated thing is doing. It's saying, I want to know which way I'm moving relative to the way I'm facing. In other words, give me the inverse transform direction of my current game object's transform component, and then I want to take it and set to the character controller that I'm using and its velocity normalized. Normalized just sets it back to 1. So that's what that's doing. Okay. Then my relative movement is equal to a new vector 2, which is my relative velocity dot x, my relative velocity dot z. Okay. As we said before, this is a 3D game, and our vector 3s are in 3 dimensions. They're in x, y, and z. Normally, we think of x and y in a 2D plane with the x being horizontal and the y being vertical. From Unity's point of view, y is always vertical. But we're looking down on our map. So if I go to my scene, I'm going to click on my scene tab here and click on the Y, so I'm looking straight down on the scene. You'll see that my X arrow, this X is red, is left and right, but what I think of as up in a normal graph is actually the Z direction. See, this is Z right here. If I click here to look at it from the side, my vertical direction is defined by my Y. So what I really want in my script is to know how I'm moving in the X direction and in the Z direction. I don't care how I'm moving in the Y because we're not going to be moving vertically, so the Y value should always stay the same. It should never change. So that's what this is doing. It's saying, go get me the direction I'm moving in the X and the Z relative to the way I'm facing. I'm going to click Save. I'm going to click back over to Animator Handler. And notice that my red squiggly lines are now gone. If your red squiggly lines are still there, it's probably because you misspelled something. So my relative movement .x and my relative movement .y. Well, wait a minute. I thought you said it was .z. Yes, because vector 2 is defined as, if I hover vector 2, you'll see that it says float x, comma, float y, meaning when it builds a vector 2, it's going to define an x value and a y value. So even though I'm passing it the z value from my movement, it's really being reported as x and y, which is what I want. Come back over here. So my horizontal movement is my relative movement .x. In other words, how far I'm moving to my left and right. And my vertical movement is the y component, which remember we set to z, which is how far I'm moving forwards and backwards relative to my own orientation. All that very complicated bit to say, what we're doing here is saying I need to know which direction my character is moving relative to himself so that I can make the animations look correct. Okay. And we're not going to do that until next time. Okay. Okay. So now if I press play, make sure I saved everything. I'm going to click save all, just make sure I didn't change anything. Nothing's updating here, so it looks like we're good to go. And press play. And I get a whole bunch of errors. The first one is my animator has not been assigned. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to my animator handler, and we're going to drag the soldier base 01 into my soldier model. And that way it will know to get the animator from my soldier model. I'm going to press play again, and we're going to get a different error, I expect. And you'll see that I'm still able to play, but it's giving me a warning down here that says parameter animator anim vertical movement does not exist. The reason it knows that is it's looking up here at my animator, and there are no parameters. So I should add them. And I'm going to add a float here called anim vertical movement. And add another float called anim horizontal movement. Okay. Now I'm going to make sure that my soldier stays highlighted and these selected. I'm going to press play, and I want to see if it's passing the values. And it is. Okay. So if I'm moving forward, then my relative vertical movement is 1. My relative horizontal movement is 0, because I'm not moving to my left or to my right. If I press the A key to move to my left, I'm moving -1 in the X direction. If I press to the right, I'm moving, my horizontal movement is 1. My vertical movement is 0, because I'm not moving forwards or backwards relative to my character. And if I press the S key, my vertical movement is -1. We can use all of that to build an animation blend tree that will cause very nice animations to be displayed for us, so that our character will look like he's moving in the direction that he's moving. So I'm gonna.
Real quick, what did you drag? You clicked on the animator handler.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you clicked the soldier base 01 into it?
And dragged it down into where it says my soldier model.
Yeah, mine won't let me do that. Like, it gives me a little no symbol.
Okay, let's look at your script. Is your soldier model called public game object?
Yes.
Can you copy your animator handler into the chat?
Hmm.
I have a weirder question. When my character strays, his horizontal movement doesn't fully hit -1 or 1. It goes up to 0.3 and -0.3.
That's also a problem, but we'll get to it in just a second.
Okay.
In fact, Jack, if you could you can copy and paste your animator controller handler into the chat as well. I can see if there's a problem there. So that looks right. That looks right. That looks right. Public game object start. Yep, that all looks. Sorry, let me look at Tony's first. My animator, my soldier model. Game object dot my soldier model. Tony, I don't immediately see a problem, but give me 1 second to think about it. Jack. Oh. This isn't set here. This is set in your Jack. This is set in your aim orientation script. Can you drag your aim orientation script into the chat?
Yeah, sure. I'll delete the other one for you.
I didn't know you could do that.
Alright, I figured out what my issue was.
Oh, what was it?
I was clicking directly on animator handler and trying to drag it into the my soldier model there. I had to click on simple player, scroll down to where the animator handler was, and then drag the soldier model in there.
Yep. That's right. Because you're saying, because what it's trying to do is you're trying to say this particular soldier model for this particular animator controller is what I need.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see here. What do you have? It looks like you have everything right. Aim orientation, transform dot inverse direction, my relative velocity x dot c, my character controller dot vector velocity dot normalized. And you said it's only going up to 0.3, Jack?
Yeah, so when he's strafing, when he's moving side to side, his horizontal movement doesn't fully hit 1 or -1. It peaks at -0.5 and 0.5, but it stays around 0.3 and -0.3.
As if you're just holding down the A or D key?
Yeah, he'll move faster if I face him in the left or right direction, 90 degrees, though. I can screen record it for you if you'd like.
No, I want to think about it for a second. Because what's happening is your normalized vector is being trimmed down to less than 1. Do me a favor. On this, let's do debug.log my relative velocity .to string v plus at plus time. Jack, can you copy that line above where it says in between my relative velocity and my relative movement?
Alright. You want me to run the program now?
Yeah, and then I want to and strafe, and I want to see what your console says.
It won't even play. It's probably still compiling.
Yeah, it'll take a second.
Okay. Oh, it's missing. That line of code is missing a parenthesis on the end. That's it.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. I was looking at it because it said there was a compiler error. Okay, now his speed, he's slower now when he's strafing. Now he's only -0.1. Now it says he's not moving at all. I'm gonna screen share it with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, let me stop recording because this is a different kind of troubleshooting. Let me